I got a really good question regarding grand juries and Wendi Adelson and the potential for an indictment, and also whether the state needs to convene a grand jury to determine if they're going to indict Wendi. The short answer is no, they don't have to convene a grand jury. So, and the rest of it's kind of like, how does the grand jury work? The grand jury is shrouded in a great deal of mystery. Defense attorneys are not allowed to be there. It's just the prosecutor, a judge, and the grand jurors, and a court reporter. It's a completely one-sided presentation. Some states don't even have grand juries anymore. Federal grand juries exist, and they're typically seated for 18 months. I'll tell you in a second. You're not reporting every day. Some states have 1 month of service, 3 months of service, 6 months of service. I believe Florida's is 6 months. I could be wrong though. And so think of it like this. They are seated, so they are part of the grand jury, and so they're on call, sort of. And so when the state has a case that they want to present to the grand jury, they convene them for like a committee meeting. And then the prosecutor gets to be like, I have this, and I have this, and I have this. And I mean, I don't know. Do you think it was a coincidence that she did this and she did that, and she sent this text at this time, and then right after that, he sent this text at this time to this person? They get to present their case, but they can present it as strong or as weak as they want to. So, slight detour. They can use the grand jury strategically. And sometimes they use the grand jury when they don't want to bring charges. So let's say there is a big social push to bring charges against a politician or a police officer or something, and for political reasons or other reasons, the elected state attorney does not want to bring those charges. They can present the case to a grand jury, present a really weak case, and just be like, well, they say he did this. We don't really have anything to corroborate that. And then the grand jury will be like, okay, so we don't have enough to indict. We don't get to know what was said and what kind of case was presented, but then they get to go to the public, and I mean the prosecution gets to go to the public and say, we tried, guys. It's not for lack of trying. It's just that the grand jury said no. It wasn't us. But the joke is typically that a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich, because they can go in there with very shitty facts and very shitty evidence, and they can get an indictment, even if the defendant is a ham sandwich. So in cases where all of the evidence or most of the evidence is circumstantial, and a lot of times murder cases are very circumstantial, if there's no smoking gun, because the prosecutor has to evaluate a case based on, or should be evaluating a case based on, the hard facts. Do I have enough to meet the elements of this crime? So let's say they believe they have enough, but it's not necessarily, it's not legally sufficient, right? They can go to I guess it depends on your interpretation, right? So they can go to a grand jury, and that's human beings, right? And they get to determine, so they'll get presented the facts, and they'll be like, and I mean, I don't know, but at this time she did the whole thing with like the text, and this is kind of suspicious, right? And I thought this was very suspicious, and very, very conveniently, this happened at this time. And those human beings can look at it like you and I have looked at the case that's being slowly built against Wendi Adelson and be like, well, why would she have done that? Why would she have said that? Why did she do that? Why did she change the last names immediately, right? They introduce the human element and the skepticism and the gut instinct, and they can say, there's enough here, and they can return an indictment. So that way it's not on Georgia, for example, like, you didn't have enough for this indictment. Well, a grand jury said I did. So you see how it can be used either way. So they don't have to use the grand jury. In Florida, I know if it's like a capital offense, like they will typically, but you don't have to. And then I think I answered the rest of this. They convene when they have a case. So they're seated. The prosecutor knows that they have a seated grand jury, and they'll present the cases as they have them ready. And sometimes they'll have a case ready and there's no grand jury seated, and they'll sit on it until the grand jury is convened. You asked about a timeline. So the timeline is really statute of limitations, and for capital offenses, life offenses, meaning punishable by life, or felonies that result in death, there is no statute of limitations. The limit does not exist. So they can do this at any time, either with a grand jury or without. And I want to say what I think is going to be the next step, no matter how we cut it, whether Georgia gets an indictment through a grand jury or just files her own indictment. I think the next move is going to be Wendy's lawyer filing something, a motion to dismiss the indictment, most likely. And I think their argument is going to be that the evidence that is being used against her either came from immunized testimony by Wendi or it was derived from her testimony. So I think that there's going to be some sort of legal battle there with regard to the nexus between her immunized testimony, anything derived from it, and the indictment. But I didn't watch every minute of every trial, but I feel like I've seen enough to where there was testimony derived from other witnesses that were completely independent from anything that Wendi said, anything that Wendi said, or anything that was like nothing was even bounced off of her testimony. Actually, I think that Georgia did a great job of specifically not asking her some things so that when she asked it of another witness, it couldn't be said that it was derived. And when I say derived, I mean Wendi brought this up and then they go and they ask Jeff, so we know that Wendi said this. And so so they cut that out completely. So Wendy's lawyers are going to try. And like I said, I didn't watch every minute of every trial, but you know who did? The judge. And it was very likely that this case ends up in front of that same judge. And he'll know. He'll remember. But yeah, let me know if this answered your question.